In Seattle, Nicole Walker is 16 and lives with her dad Steve, her stepmom Laura, and her stepbrother Toby. Just like many teenagers, Nicole sometimes fights with her dad. Her dad often suggests refreshing her wardrobe. However, his suggestion doesn't sit well with Nicole. After school, Nicole heads to a bar with her school friends, Margot and Gary. At the bar, Nicole notices a charming and good-looking guy named David playing billiards. After they get their food, Nicole glances at David before leaving with her pals. Later, Nicole and Margot unwind by the pool at Margot's home. They talk about boyfriends and dating. Margot invites Nicole to a party, but Nicole can't go because she has to be at a James Taylor concert with her family. Margot's mom then tells them that Steve has arrived to take Nicole home. Back at home, Nicole helps Laura with making dinner. Meanwhile, Steve talks to his colleague about arranging a virtual meeting. Steve then tells his family that he has to go to Vancouver for work and can't join them for the concert. This leads to a fight. Laura gets disappointed and tells Steve he should keep his promises, especially since the concert was his idea. Feeling upset, Nicole leaves the room and heads to her bedroom. Steve takes out his frustration by hitting a cupboard. Nicole immediately calls Margot to let her know she can attend the party. Inside the dimly lit bar, while Margot dives deep into conversation with a potential crush, Nicole takes a moment to herself. David sees this as the perfect moment to come over and introduce himself. Their dialogue flows effortlessly. Out of nowhere, a fight breaks out at the party. People start running all over the place. David helps Nicole get to safety. As they move, he calls his buddy Logan to meet them. David takes Nicole to the building's rooftop, and they use the fire exit ladder to get down. As Nicole climbs down, the rooftop door suddenly opens, and party members rush in. Among them are Margot and Logan, who are now holding hands. Nicole calls out to Margot as she goes down the ladder. Margot just waves and says they'll catch up later. David is waiting for Nicole at the bottom of the ladder. They discover a peaceful place with a city view and spend hours discussing their lives. Nicole shares stories about her mom, who lives in a grand house in Los Angeles. She admits she's not very close to her dad, since she only started living with him recently. Curious about David's family, Nicole turns the conversation towards him. David says he doesn't live with his parents, but they talk a lot. While he's talking, Nicole stares at him. David asks her what she's thinking. Nicole says David is different than she first thought, even calling him sweet. David compliments her looks and wonders if she has any flaws. Nicole jokes that she has a midnight curfew. Instead of taking her home, David turns back the time on her watch for a few minutes. They share a passionate kiss. When David starts to touch her more, Nicole pushes him back a bit, saying maybe he found her flaw. David says it's not a flaw, just another thing to respect. At home, Laura is upset because Nicole broke her curfew. Nicole says her watch broke. Laura tells her to go to bed and wash off her makeup, saying she looks like a harlot. When Steve returns from his trip, he talks to Nicole about why she was late. He wants to know who she was with. Nicole says it was just a guy she met. Steve insists on meeting David. Nicole says she's not even sure if she'll see David again. As a punishment, Steve assigns her chores for 2 weeks. He also tells her to apologize to Laura. Nicole gets annoyed and apologizes when Laura says sorry for her rude comment. In their room, Laura tells Steve he's too lenient with Nicole and should have grounded her. At school, David picks up Nicole to play billiards. Nicole is smitten with him. When David mentions wanting to meet her family, she agrees right away. She introduces him to her dad, who questions David about school. During this, Laura walks in and asks for Nicole's help in the garden. Nicole excuses herself to change, but David offers to help Laura instead. Toby also wants to join in. Impressed by David's gardening skills, Nicole and her friend Margot watch approvingly. After gardening, David asks to clean up. Steve directs him to the bathroom. Margot tries to invite Steve to an amusement park, but he laughs it off. David then loudly asks Nicole for a Coke, catching Steve's eye. As Margot playfully bends to tie her shoe, Steve notices David watching him look at Margot, making the atmosphere awkward. David tells Nicole they must pick up his friend Logan, and Nicole heads off to gather her things. Before Steve leaves the room, he reminds David of Nicole's midnight curfew. David says he understands but secretly turns back the clock when Steve isn't looking. From a monitor, Steve watches as David helps Nicole into his car in a way that makes him uneasy. At the amusement park, Nicole and David are affectionate with each other. Back home, Steve realizes he's missed a work deadline, unaware that David tampered with his clock. He tells Laura that he must return to Vancouver and invites her to come along. She agrees. As they get ready to head to Vancouver, Laura gives Nicole and Toby the hotel's contact info, reminding them to watch out for each other. Before departing, Steve tells Nicole not to let strangers into the house. Later, Nicole phones David, letting him know her parents are away. David mentions prior commitments with friends, but sensing Nicole's hope to see him, he suggests coming over later. Nicole agrees, even giving him their security code and telling him she'll be waiting. That night, David enters the Walkers' residence. He quietly explores, pausing to study Nicole's family photo and jewelry box. Making his way to Nicole's room, he finds her asleep. He then carefully peels back her blanket, revealing she's lightly dressed. When she awakens, she's met with the sight of naked David looming over her. David moves closer, and as the two make love for the first time, he whispers words of love to Nicole. Things change the next day when Nicole leaves school. David arrives to pick up Nicole from school and sees her hugging a friend, Gary. Jealous, David attacks Gary, even hitting him when he's down. Nicole tries to intervene and ends up getting hurt. Realizing she's upset, David asks her to come with him, but she tells him to leave her alone. Later, after showering at home, Nicole notices that David unintentionally caused a bruise around her eye. When Laura enters her room, Nicole lies, saying she was injured during volleyball practice. Laura believes her and covers up the bruise with makeup. Downstairs, Nicole avoids making eye contact with her dad, afraid he might scold her. After Nicole leaves, Steve asks Laura what they are talking about. Laura says Nicole confided in her and that she gave Nicole a makeup lesson. Meanwhile, Nicole and Gary discuss David's attack on Gary as they walk through the school hallway. David listens from behind without them knowing. After her class, Nicole finds a note in her locker from David. The letter asks her for forgiveness and to meet him at the bar where they first met. David waits at the bar, frustrated when Nicole doesn't show up. Later, Nicole throws away flowers sent by David. Laura watches her, waiting for an explanation, but Nicole says nothing. That night, Laura and Steve hear Nicole crying. When Laura checks on her, Nicole says the flowers were from David and tells her about his sudden aggression toward Gary. Steve overhears and asks Nicole if David gave her the black eye. Nicole says she's already told them the story. As she cries into Laura's arms, Laura tells Steve she'll handle it. When Steve is about to leave the room, Laura asks him for a tissue. While picking it up, he drops it and finds a condom wrapper. Instead of asking Nicole about the wrapper, Steve warns her not to ruin her life because of any past mistakes he might have made. Confused, Nicole doesn't understand what he means. Steve stresses that while she lives in his home, she needs to follow his rules. He adds that David isn't good for her. Upset, Nicole says what happens between her and David is their business. Laura later questions Steve about his talk with Nicole. He shows her the condom wrapper and says he believes David hit Nicole. Meanwhile, Nicole retrieves the discarded flowers and finds a photo of her and David. The next day, she tells her friend Margot that David didn't mean to punch her. As they talk, David shows up, but Nicole leaves before he can speak to her. Catching up with her, David claims he didn't know Gary was hugging her and promises never to hurt her again. Nicole believes him. Steve arrives home to find David at his house, hanging out by the pool with his family. Confused, he asks Laura why David is there. She says it's better than if Nicole snuck out to see David. Steve is left speechless as David kisses Nicole's shoulder in front of him. Later, he learns that David has lied to Nicole about his background. He calls Laura to share his discovery. David was shuffled between foster homes and institutions until he was 18. Laura thinks David is lying to impress Nicole because he's embarrassed about being an orphan. Unconvinced, Steve still wants David to stay away from Nicole. He goes to her school, waits for David, and tells him they must talk. Steve directly asks David to stop seeing Nicole. Angry, David brings up Steve's shortcomings, including leaving Nicole when she needed him and having issues at work. He even questions Steve's ability to satisfy his wife. Shocked, Steve threatens David and tells him to stay away from his family. Steve drives away angrily. Meanwhile, David keeps hitting the same spot on his chest that Steve touched earlier. Still mad, Steve asks for legal advice from his friend Alex to keep David away from Nicole. Alex warns him that taking action against David might backfire. Unfazed, Steve insists he'll do something. At home, Nicole accuses Steve of hurting David. Steve denies it, but Nicole cuts him off, calling him a hypocrite, and says she's lost respect for him. Upset, she leaves with David, who speeds off. They share a romantic moment in the car. When they return home, Nicole initially decides to stay but later drives to David's after a change of heart. Arriving, she witnesses a party at David's place. She sees Margot in a compromising position with drugs and a forceful intimate interaction between David and Margot. Scared by what she's seen, Nicole rushes home. The next day, David shows up at her school, but Nicole tells him to stay away. Her friend Gary supports her. Nicole later confronts Margot about the party. Margot blames David for what happened, saying she was forced to do it. But Nicole doesn't believe her and ends their friendship. Margot drives off, followed by David, who gets violent with her, demanding she fix his relationship with Nicole. David goes to apologize to Steve but is turned away. He returns home and carves Nicole's name into his chest. The following day, after work, Steve finds his car vandalized by David. Meanwhile, David follows Gary and kills him. Steve gets concerned when he can't reach Nicole and Laura, so he asks Margot for David's address. David corners Nicole in the restroom at the mall, insisting they belong together. He leaves when someone else enters. Steve goes to David's house, finds a manipulated family photo, and wrecks the place angrily. David and his friends find the mess and decide to confront Steve. David's gang heads to Steve's house. Margot arrives first and announces Gary's death. Outside, David's group kills the family dog. Inside, Steve's wife Laura assures everyone they're safe due to the security system. But Nicole says David knows the code. They fend off multiple attempts to break in. Eventually, they see a security guard approaching. David tries to disable him but fails. The guard is shot dead by one of David's friends. They capture Steve and enter the house. Meanwhile, Toby quietly slips into Nicole's car, quickly dialing 911 for help. In the chaos, David shoots one of his friends for trying to assault Nicole. Toby returns and frees his parents. Steve fights David but is overpowered. Nicole stabs him with a piece of pipe when David is about to shoot Steve. A fierce fight ensues, ending when Steve throws David out the window, killing him. As police and paramedics arrive, the family embraces, relieved that David is finally out of their lives. Wow, what a scary situation to be in. There were a lot of red flags that Nicole refused to see.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.